Y'all could be seated. Hello, hello, hey y'all. Hello. Long time no see. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Okay, so I said I have 5 minutes, so I'm gonna do this really quick, okay? All right, so I was told to talk about family conflict and crisis. So I decided to go to King David's family because that's like my guy. So we're gonna talk about different ways that families can experience conflict, trauma, and crisis. And I'm gonna illustrate this by delving really quickly into generational patterns, often referred to as generational curses, using the example of King David's family. So generational patterns, behaviors is what we call it in the clinical world. In the spiritual world, we usually say generational curses. And so this refers to negative behaviors or consequences that seem to reoccur in our families across generations. These patterns can manifest as repeated conflict, traumas, crises, passed down from one generation to the next. So, King David. So, he was a man after God's own heart. I used to find him highly problematic because I did not like the way men in the church used him to, get away with stuff. But he was who he was, and I really came to really appreciate him. And so he was a man after God's own heart, no matter the different things he did, and he faced significant turmoil within his family. His life and the lives of his descendants reveal how generational curses and sin can conflict and impact families. And so we know David and Bathsheba, we all know that, we talk about it a lot. And so, David had an affair with Bathsheba, then there was a subsequent murder of her husband Uriah, which marked the beginning of a series of family crisis. The prophet Nathan was like, you did what you did, my dude, that's not right. And so the sword is not going to leave your family. Like, you're going to see this, death and the sword. So we'll start to see that. So this sin set a precedent for secrecy, betrayal, and violence in his family. So next we have Amnon and Tamar. We can see that in 2 Samuel 13. I forgot to give scriptural references. So David has many children, and David's son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar. So he saw his half-sister and was like, she looked good. Like, he thought he was in love with her, but he was just in lust. And so his trifling cousin kind of put up a scheme on how he can seduce his half-sister. His half-sister was like, you can just ask to marry me. We don't have to do this. He raped her. And there we go. It sets another set of issues and dysfunction. And then David's failure to address this atrocity caused even more issues. And so now we have Absalom. So Absalom, he was enraged by his father's inaction. He was like, I know that's your son, but I'm your son and that's your daughter, and you're not going to do anything about it. Now, I believe he didn't do anything about it, David, because he saw himself in Amnon. Sometimes when you see a sin in your child, you either over punish or you just don't do it at all, because in a way that's like punishing yourself and you don't really want to deal with that. And that's my own personal feeling. So anyway, so that happened. And so, So Absalom caused a whole civil war and a deep family division. And then we have our good old Solomon. Despite his wisdom, Solomon, David's son, he fell into idolatry, influenced by his many wives. Many wives. And this led to the division of the kingdom after his death, showing how the seeds of David's action continued to bear bitter fruit. So that's a wrap up, right? So let's talk about how this, how does this have implications for families in today? So families today can also experience conflict, trauma, and crises through generational patterns such as addiction. And it could be substance abuse, but it also could be sexual addiction. It's starting to be talked about a lot, but not as much. And so there's an addiction to people, addiction to things, sometimes even addiction to working. It's in our society, it's considered a good thing to work, but there's an addiction that some people have to it, and that can be problematic. Then there's abuse, right? There's physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and we see that. And when we talk about emotional abuse, sometimes we think it's just simply like, oh, well, I don't abuse my child emotionally. I don't curse them out. I don't call them out of their names. But then it's like, yeah, but do you ignore them when you're mad at them? Like, do you give them the silent treatment? Like, the silent treatment that you're stonewalling them. That's a form of abuse, when you just ignore them because you don't like something that they did or said. And so we want to think about these patterns of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse that can be passed down, right? A lot of things we say is cultural. Is it really cultural, or is it abuse that we've seen a lot in different families? Because sometimes it's abuse that we've seen a lot in families, and we just say it's cultural. My parents did it, my mama did it, and ting and ting, and then it's like, oh, it's okay. This is what our families do. It's a part of our culture. No, that's not cultural. Abuse is not cultural. And then there's neglect, which I think is one of the worst forms of abuse. Yeah, I think because you're just not paying any attention to your child, you're neglecting them. And I think it's the worst because it plants seeds of unworthiness. Where a child, you're not telling them they're unworthy, but you're showing it to them. And so they feel that way. And it impacts all the relationships they're in. Anything that they touch, sometimes they'll self-sabotage because they don't think they're worthy of the things that are coming to them. And it's really, really sad. So it's crucial to recognize these patterns of abuse and seek healing through faith, therapy, and also open communication, like direct open communication. I know a lot of us, we don't like to speak directly. For some reason, we think that's rude. I don't know where we came up with that. But speaking directly doesn't mean speaking bluntly and recklessly. Speaking directly is saying, you hurt me when you did this. When you did this, what did that mean? Ask questions. That can really help it can really get to the root of the problem and avoid a lot of unnecessary conflict. So this is my conclusion. Just as King David's family experienced profound conflict, trauma, and crisis through generational patterns, so can we as our families today. By understanding these patterns and seeking God's intervention, we can break these cycles and foster healthier family relationships. Also seeking marriage and family therapists or other forms of therapists or pastoral counselors. My uncle's a pastoral counselor, like really talking to these people and like walk away from shame. And so a question that I want to leave you all with, I think I did 5 minutes. Ooh, I did, yes. Okay, so a question that I want to leave you all just to kind of chew on is 2. How can we as a faith community support families in identifying and breaking free from generational patterns of conflict and trauma? Better yet, how can we overcome shame and judgment and lean into the grace of God to identify our contribution to family conflict, trauma, or crisis? And I want you to remember that inaction is being complicit to the issue. So if you're like, oh, I just don't want to deal with them, that's on them. That's inaction, you're still complicit because you're aware and you're a part of the system. And so that is my thingamajigger. Okay, thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
We're having our intercessory prayer at this time. And we would like to sing the first stanza and chorus of 476. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Hymn number 476.